Hi, and welcome back to David Pattinson's Accused Friends. Today I want to talk about this concept of consent contracts, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, and wanted to have a discussion about it. Now, we hear a lot in the popular culture about what isn't consent, about how this isn't consent, and that's not consent, and this isn't consent. And of course, it begs the question about, okay, well, what is consent? And the feminist movement talk about enthusiastic consent, or they talk about affirmative consent. But really what it is it's ambiguous consent. These are a guilty until proven innocent type scenario. So if the woman says, yeah, it was consensual, that's fine, there's no problem. If the woman says it wasn't consensual, then it wasn't consensual, and the man has to face prison or at least a long court case as a result. And, women have the right to change their minds, and men do not have the right to change their minds. And so how do you create provable consent from a man's point of view in the court of law? You've got the consent, but now you have to prove it in a court case. And I got me thinking a lot about this, and what you see and hear when it comes to consent contracts is really two things to dissuade men from seeking them. Number one is that they're inadmissible in a court case, and number two is that they're not legally binding. And so it got me thinking about, what is legally binding? What is a legally binding contract? And I looked it up, and the definition of a legally binding contract requires 5 different things, and let me read them out to you. So number one is consideration, number 2 is capacity, number 3 is intention, number 4 is formalities, and number 5 is a legal purpose. So if you have a legally binding contract that has those 5 criteria, then it is legally binding. Now, in a court of law, when an accused person is facing the charges in the court case, the court is going to want the jury to look at 2 specific things with regards to consent. The first one is, did the defendant seek consent from the accuser? And the second one is, did the defendant have a reasonable belief that consent was provided? And you have to get those 2 criteria met to get an acquittal. So from my point of view, a consent contract meets those 2 criteria. Number one is that the defendant is seeking consent by presenting a consent contract to the accuser pre-sexual encounter. And number 2 is that if the consent contract is signed, under legally sound conditions, then the accused man is going to have a reasonable belief that, they've received consent. Another thing that needs to go in these consent contracts is what I call the anything goes provision. When you look at these court cases, they'll usually say, okay, well, they'll break up the charges into different sexual acts. So they'll say that sexual encounter X was consensual, but sexual encounter Y, that was not consensual. So we acquit the man on this charge, but we convict him on that charge. There was the case in Jersey where the doctor met the girl on Tinder, had a consensual sexual relationship or encounter, and but he touched her breasts during the sexual encounter, and the court ruled that the sex was consensual, but the breast touching was not consensual, so he was convicted on that. There was also the Alex Hepburn case in Worcestershire, where he had non-consensual oral sex with the girl, which he's convicted on, but he had consensual sex with the girl after that, and that was fine. So, and he was acquitted on that other charge. So this is why men, I believe, need to have consent contracts as a form of self-defense. You could also look at I know it's a foreign example, but the Judge Brett Kavanaugh case in the United States, his confirmation hearing for the Supreme Court, and there was the woman, Blasey Ford, who accused him of raping her 40 years ago, and there was no evidence that he had raped her, and there was no evidence that he had not. And if you're in a guilty until proven innocent court case or hearing, a consent contract is something you can pull out and say, here's the consent contract, here's the signature, here's all the terms, and this is part of my defense in this instance. So unfortunately, we don't have innocent until proven guilty in these types of cases. So you have to take the point of view from a man's point of view that you need something provable in a court of law. And this is an idea of, I think it could well become more widespread. It's going to be discouraged by society and by women, because women want to be the sexual selectors. They want to say, hey, even though this great looking guy or this attractive guy did not seek consent, I like him, so it's not rape. Whereas this other guy, maybe he did seek consent, maybe he didn't seek consent, I'm not interested in a relationship with him now, so we're going to call that rape. And so the Crown Prosecution Service and the media and the government really is going to take the side of the woman. It's a he said, she said case, which really means it's a she said, that's what happens outcome. And, men need to have some sort of provable document or provable evidence to keep them out of prison. And I think they should proactively seek it. In order to get out of consent contracts, women will try to use the argument that, I was pressured into signing this, or I didn't have proper time to evaluate the information. So I encourage men that to counter this, what you need to do is present the consent contract to the female, have her review it with a lawyer, have her sign it, on camera, have her certify that she's of sound mind, and, have a cooling off period or whatever it is. And so, these excuses are moot when they are brought out in a court case. And so that's my thoughts on consent contracts. I definitely think there's a place for them, and I think it's something that's going to occur more in the future. Excuse me. I know in Canada, they're trying to make a law to ban consent contracts from a court case and make them inadmissible, but I have not seen any evidence that they would not be admitted into a British court case. The inadmissibility of them may come in the future, but it doesn't stop an accused man from saying, I had a consent contract with the accuser, but it has been inadmissible in this court case for reasons out of my control. And again, I think a jury would look sympathetically on that. So hope this provides food for thought. And thanks everyone for watching David Pattinson's Accused Friends.